two videos, we completed our discussion of white wines. We got to taste 3 white wines made from the 3 white noble grapes: Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc, and Chardonnay. If you missed those videos and would like to view them, please click on the links below. In this video, we're going to move on to the next type of wine, rosé. I've been looking forward to the rosé discussion, as rosé wines are often overlooked and underrated, and at times have had not the greatest of reputations, which is totally unwarranted, as these are very nice wines. In order to discuss rosés, I need to go over a few terms and clarify them for you. The first two are simple: blush and rosé. They're used interchangeably. They're the same thing. However, rosé is the preferred term, and blush not being used much today. The next two terms are a little more technical. The first one is maceration. Maceration is one of the steps in creating wine. I'm not going to go over how to create wine in this video. I'll do that in a future video. I just want you to understand maceration. The maceration step directly precedes the step of fermentation. Fermentation being the step where the sugars are converted into alcohol by yeast. In the maceration step, the grapes themselves are starting to break down. The skins are splitting and falling off the pulp. The pulp's starting to disintegrate somewhat, and the juice is starting to flow much more freely. The collection of stems, skins, juice, and pulp is called the must. The first method of making a rosé wine takes advantage of maceration, and I have an example of that here, and that's a white Merlot. The vintner monitors the color of the juice in the must. When the color reaches the color the vintner wants for the rosé, the skins and stems are removed, and then the juice is fermented into the rosé wine. The second method is by blending. I have an example of that here. This is a blended rosé between Chardonnay, a white wine, and Barbera, a red wine. The Barbera grape native to Italy. I have this bottle to show you that you can combine these two methods. This is a blended rosé as well. It's a blend between Syrah, Merlot, Pinot Noir, and Grenache. Each one of those wines was made separately, macerated and fermented separate from one another. They are then blended back together to make the resulting ending rosé wine. As you can see, there are many types of rosé wines. They're made many different ways: single grape varieties, blends. That leads me to the next point. There is no typical rosé wine. Therefore, we can't use that unblinded tasting strategy we use with our white wines. However, what I can do is give you some general notes about rosé wines, which you can keep in the back of your mind as you taste rosés. First, rosé wines are made all over the known wine world. Wherever wine grapes are grown and wine is produced, rosés are made. The world's best dry rosés come from a region in southern France near the Mediterranean known as Provence. There's an interesting story about a very specific rosé made in the United States. You probably are familiar with the name, white Zinfandel. But I'm sure you didn't know, white Zinfandel was originally made completely by accident. In 1975, at the Sutter Home Vineyard in Napa Valley, California, they were making a Zinfandel wine. If you're not familiar with Zinfandel, it's a deep, dark red wine. As fermentation was progressing, for some unknown reason, it just plain stopped. In winemaking terms, the fermentation got stuck. Well, the Sutter Home team was not able to unstick it. They couldn't get it started again. So they now had a wine, and the wine had some interesting characteristics. Because fermentation didn't complete, all the sugar didn't get converted to alcohol. Therefore, this is a wine that's going to be somewhat sweet because there's residual sugar. It's also a wine where because all the sugar didn't convert to alcohol, the alcohol isn't at the level you would want for a Zinfandel. It's a lower alcohol wine. Sutter Home had to decide what to do with the wine. After careful deliberation, they really decided, let's just bottle it and sell it, see what happens. As it turns out, it was very popular. It sold really well. They sold every bit of it. Sutter Home still makes white Zinfandel today, and it's still just as popular and sells just as well as it did in 1975. The color of rosé wines range from a light pink to a middle red or a garnet. Aromas for rosés are fruit, vegetables, spices, toast aromas, and flower aromas. Flavors: all the berries: raspberry, strawberry, blackberry, melons, citrus, and also floral taste as well. The body of rosés tend to range from light to medium. Alcohol ranges from 11 to 13% on average. Acidity, medium to high. Sweetness. Rosés range the entire gamut of sweetness. Very sweet to completely dry. Old world rosés. Rosés made in Europe tend to be made dry. New world rosés. Any rosé made outside of Europe can run the entire gamut of very sweet to completely dry. Tannins in rosés are usually a little more than white wines, but a whole lot less than red wines, so somewhere between low and medium. Think of a rosé as a light red wine with a white wine flavor type characteristics, and those are crisp, fresh, and fruity. Additional things about rosé wines. They want to be served chilled, 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. They want to be served in a white wine glass. There is a specific rosé glass. I'll describe it to you in a second. Don't run out and buy them. It will not make rosé wines taste any better. It isn't necessary. A white wine glass is sufficient, and that's what I use. But the description of a rosé glass. It's a little broader bowl, a shallower bowl, and as the taper comes up right at the very lip, the glass flares outward. Rosés do not need to be decanted. They don't like to age. You need to drink them young. Food pairings for rosés. Sweet rosés, barbecue meats, roasts, and rich sauces. Dry rosés, grilled fish and chicken, vegetables, and salads. Now let's get to actually tasting and evaluating our rosé wines. Most of the rosés I'm going to taste are from California. The first one I'm going to do is the white Merlot. As I mentioned before, this was made using the maceration techniques. It's also a single varietal rosé, and that varietal, of course, is Merlot. Let's check out the clarity and brilliance and legs of our wine. Very clear, very brilliant. And those legs are there, but they're quite slight, so I'm thinking we may have a light-bodied rosé. The color of this rosé is a medium red or garnet. Now, let's focus on aromas. Let's swirl our wine and take our first sniff. Definitive watermelon aroma, very easy to pick up. Now let's try a second sniff. Picking up raspberry and blackberry, some of the berries. Now let's get ready to focus on flavors. Take that taste. Well, that melon is definitely there. Some of the berries. Citrus, definitely an orange. And there's a little bit of nutmeg in there. Body of this particular wine is definitely light bodied. The alcohol for this particular rosé is 11.4%, and that kind of goes along with the body as well. Acidity is quite high, maybe a little bit too high. Sweetness, it definitely has a little bit of sweetness to it. It's not real sweet. I'm going to call it semi-dry. Tannins, they're somewhere between low and medium and pushing towards medium, and that may be due to the grape that's made with. Merlot tends to be a high tannin grape, so I think that's why it's pushing a little towards medium. Balance, I don't think this wine is in balance. It's somewhat out of balance, and it's due to that really high acidity, the lack of some bigger alcohol, and that sweetness, even though it's there, isn't enough to help that acidity. Some food pairings for this particular rosé wine, I would say, are Mexican cuisine, smoky glazed ham, some lamb, some of the red meats. Well, we've completed our assessment of this particular wine. It is a very nice rosé, and it drinks really well. Let's move on to our next rosé. Before we do that, I'm going to take a bite of some white bread. As I mentioned in my last white wine video, white bread will cleanse your palate. Plain white bread. Well, let's check out our clarity, brilliance, and legs on this particular wine. Very clear. Nice and brilliant. The legs on this wine are a little more definitive. We might be more like a medium-bodied rosé here. The color of this particular rosé is a pink color. Let's get ready to focus on aromas that swirl our wine. Berries, lots of berries. strawberries, raspberries. Let's try again. Oh, and some tart cherries and blackberries as well. So all the berries are in this one. Let's get ready to focus on flavors and take that sip. Tropical fruits. Citrus again, but this time lemon. And I'm picking up, I mentioned earlier, the mineral type flavors. Best way to describe this particular wine is I don't know, I'll say a gravelly flavor. The body of this particular rosé is somewhere between light and medium. It's not really light and it's not really medium, but it's somewhere in the middle. The alcohol for this particular rosé is 13.4%. That's probably what's pushing us towards that medium body and where we saw some of those legs. Acidity is still high, but not near as high as the white Merlot. Sweetness, that's pretty easy. This wine is completely dry. Tannins again are low. I'm going to say this wine is in balance. I really like the play of the higher alcohol, a little bit lesser acidity, and that dryness. They all play together very nicely. Food pairings for this particular wine. I'm going to say salads and vegetables. Some of the white meats, chicken, turkey, pork. Well, we've completed our assessment of rosé wines. I hope you found it informative. Again, I think it shows the variety of which rosés exist. Many different types of grapes can be used, different vinning methods can be used. And like I said, I think you should try a lot of different rosé wines to really appreciate the real variety that they bring to the table. They are great during the summertime, this time of the year, for those barbecues and those outside salads on the deck, or just sitting out in the evening for a nice summer cool wine drink. In our next video, we'll start our discussion on red wines. We'll taste two of the red wines, Syrah and Pinot Noir, made from two of the red noble grapes. And as always, raise a glass and have a drink.